G'day battlers, and today we're going to be jumping in for two brand new metas coming to Silph Arena Factions. That is going to be the Vanguard Field and the Ember Field. Now, if you don't know what Silph Factions is, I'm going to link a video up there that explains it a little bit, but the basic outline is that it is a team format where a team of 7 versus a team of 7 each week, and in a couple of different metas. Two of those metas this cycle are going to be these two right here. Now, this video we are going to go through the Ember Field first, and then we're going to be going through the Vanguard Field, and that is all timestamps down below. But before we get into that, also down below is a link to the brand new PvP Steve Discord, so please do go ahead and join that as well. We'll hopefully be doing some more Great League practice as we sort of come up to the Brisbane Regional that is going to be this coming weekend, that I'm not prepared for because they haven't announced the new Go Battle League move update. In that regard as well, I did originally say this video wasn't going to come out until after they made that announcement on the move updates, but I figured I probably didn't have enough time in preparing for the regional once they announced those move updates as well, and so I'll leave a comment down below that explains the sort of differences in both the Ember Field and the Vanguard Field, and sort of how they're affected by the move update, and if the Silph team makes any new bans if some Pokemon becomes way too overpowered. But enough of that preamble, let's just jump into it and take a look at the Ember Field first up. So as you can see right here, we've got, it's sort of a basic Silph Arena meta where we have a couple of allowed typings, so you can use Pokemon with typings of electric, fire, grass, and ground, with I think they use the term airdropped in Pokemon, which they used for the first time in the last faction cycle, with also allowing Alolan Mark, Hisuian Quillfish, Honchkrow, Machamp, Malamar, Poliwrath, Primeape, and Sirfetch'd. So bringing in a couple of fighters as well as some Dark Poison, plus Honchkrow coming in as well, just for a bit of spice. Now we also have bans in this meta. We've got Dragon types, Rock types, Steel types, Mud Boys, so Pokemon with the Water and Ground dual typing, and then also just Abomasnow, Dugtrio, Lantern, Diggersby, Nidoqueen, Salandit. So is that the little one? Is that the big one? Salazzle, maybe? Also, Pachirisu, Ninetales, Stunfisk, Unova form, Whimsicott, and then Shadows and Megas are also banned. So let's take a look at the Ember Cup Meta Simplified infographic. Okay, my microphone died like halfway through talking about the Ember Field, so I decided I'll just like cut this in, start it again, and we'll go fresh talking about the Ember Field. So we've got 4 main groups on the graphic here. In the top left, we have the Flyers plus Ruderigus has been thrown in there. On the top right, we have the Fighters. In the bottom left, we have, I guess you could call them the ground types, with Piloswine and Hippowdon, and in the bottom right, we have the Dark Poisons in Hisuian, Quillfish, and Alolan Mark. Straight away, you're going to notice that a lot of this is the Pokemon that were airdropped in, so it sort of seems a little odd that the main typings of the meta aren't necessarily the things that everything is sort of coming around. It's more the airdropped stuff, but I think overall, before we sort of dive in, the main 3 Pokemon to watch out for in this meta are Ruderigus, Piloswine, and Hisuian Quillfish. Those 3 are really going to be setting the meta, I suppose, and you're going to see them on a lot of teams. There have already been a couple of practice tournaments running around. I know Inadequance did a video that included some of his battles from the Ember Field as well, so I'll try to remember to link that down below. Again, if I haven't, just let me know in the comments that it is that I have forgotten, and I'll put it down there. But on the sort of broad scale, we have the Flyers plus the Ghost Ruderigus beating the Fighters beating the Dark Poisons also being weak to the ground types because they are weak to ground, the ground types beating the Flyers losing to the Dark Poisons, and then the Fighters beating the ground types. So you don't need to like memorize that. We were just sort of briefly covering that before we start diving into these Pokemon, because there is a lot going on. In the Silph Factions format, you are allowed to change your moveset once teams have been revealed. This is very different from Silph Arena tournaments, where you have to keep the same moveset from the time you register through to the end of the tournament. In Silph Factions, you can adjust it based on what your opponent has. So a lot of these Pokemon have different movesets you can run. Just focusing on the fighting types, we have Poliwrath, who has access to Ice Punch, Parrot Punch, Dynamic Punch, Scald, Hydro Pump, and then also technically on the fast move side has access to Mud Shot and Bubble, although I think Mud Shot is almost always the way to go there. Sirfetch'd has got Night Slash, Leaf Blade, it's got fighting moves as well. I think it's got access to Brave Bird also, so more options there. Primeape has got Night Slash, Ice Punch, Close Combat, Cross Chop. It's just stacked as well, and so there's lots of things going on that and not just in the fighting types as well. Hisuian Quillfish also just is a Swiss Army knife of a Pokemon with Poison Sting and Poison Jab as the two big fast moves. On the charge move side, it's got Aqua Tail, Sludge Wave, Shadow Ball. I'm missing one, Ice Beam, and all of them are sort of viable in one case or another. So it's going to really be a case where you can adjust your team quite a lot, even picking the same couple of Pokemon based on what your opponent does bring out. And it's going to be something that sort of has to be kept in mind, I think, as you sort of prepare your teams, in that the maybe Dynamic Punch Poliwrath is the ultimate counter your team, but you're expecting that most people are running Ice Punch Scald. I think Dynamic Punch Scald is probably the way to go in general, but you can't rely on that, because then they can just change their moveset to be Dynamic Punch, and then you might be in some trouble there. So a lot of these Pokemon are going to be a little bit tricky to sort of get around, but we'll see how it goes. Now, the Dark Poisons don't have a lot of weaknesses, Ground being sort of the big one, and that is where Hippowdon and Piloswine come in. But they both have access to ground moves. I think that Hippowdon has access to Earth Power, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I'm wrong. And then Piloswine has access to Bulldoze as well, that can do that super effective damage to them. But they've also got play up against the Flyers. So Hippowdon has a lot of fast moves. Again, so many options. But I think that Ice Fang is probably the big one. Maybe Thunder Fang. Just because then you also get super effective damage up against Poliwrath with the water typing. But either Ice Fang or Thunder Fang, both going to be doing super effective damage to the Flyers. And then Piloswine also has Powder Snow as its fast move. Plus is likely running Avalanche, which can do a lot of damage as well. I think that Piloswine has the option of running Bulldoze and Stone Edge. But I probably wouldn't recommend it, just because Avalanche is a little bit more spammy, and you get the same type attack bonus as well. So you do a little bit more damage with those Avalanches rather than the Stone Edge. I think Inadequates in his video was talking about sort of running the Rock Ice Piloswine, so ditching Bulldoze entirely. But with how popular Hisuian Quillfish is, I sort of feel like maybe Bulldoze is the way to go. But again, you can adapt on the fly to what you're sort of seeing on your opponent's team of 6. Hippowdon also has access to Body Slam, so it does have some spam factor as well. They can pretty much hit anything in the cup. Actually, I saw Hippowdon sort of talking about in Matt Brewer's video on the Ember Cup. So usually I'm pretty quick on the meta videos, but because I delayed, obviously, we're a little late here, so I'm going to link to just some other videos in the description down below on the Ember Cup, so you can sort of get as much knowledge as you can. But largely, I think that's sort of the main deal. Runerigus is something that you are going to have some specific counters for as well, because nothing really hard counters it. It's a really strong Pokemon, and if you haven't built one yet, I'm pretty sure it's one that you need to do raids with Yamask or Galarian Yamask as your buddy. So maybe get those raids in now. I mean, the Ultra Beast event is coming up. Well, I've just done my raids, but so oops. Probably should have thought about that an hour and a half ago. But if you haven't done it yet, maybe put it as your buddy now, because then you can sort of get your Runerigus set up for the Ember Field, and then you might be ripe and good to go. But other than that, this is sort of the general outline. Zapdos and Gligar generally being used as flying types to beat up the fighters, and then also just applying some ground damage from Gligar as well with Dig to the Dark Poisons, but Dig is a pretty atrocious move. So I think that's where I'm going to leave the discussion of the Ember Field for now. Obviously, this might change with the move update coming for Go Battle League in a couple of days' time, and I will leave a comment down below that sort of goes through the changes to this meta as a result of that. But let's, cut to the time code, the new time code, starting now as we sort of jump back and take a look at the Vanguard Field. Now, usually I sort of do a meta simplified format like we just saw with the Ember Field, where I'd sort of draw an infographic, draw some arrows around. I'm not going to do that this time for the Vanguard Field, because it is a little bit different, and I'll sort of show you what I mean. So we've got a slot-based meta here, which isn't foreign to Silph Arena sort of monthly metas, but is very different for Silph Factions. I believe it's the first time that we're seeing that for Factions. So you've got 6 slots on your team. The first slot has to be an Ice type or a Water type, or both, that is not Frostlass, Jellicent, Kingdra, or Poliwrath. On the second slot, you have to have a Fighting type, a Ground type, or a Rock type. In the third slot, you have to have a Ghost type or a Poison type. Fourth slot, Dragon or Flying. And then the last 2 slots you can fill up in a little bit of a generalist filler slot, where you can have Water types, Poison, Ground, Rock, and Flying, that do not have the dual typings of Ice, Ghost, Fighting, and Dragon. all slots having bands of Dark Fairy Steel, everything from Gen 7 up, which includes Alolan and Galarian, or is it Alolan? Alolan, Galarian, Hisuian forms. Also bands on Abomasnow, Trevenant, Lantern, Altaria, and Metacham. So I'm just going to get straight off of this screen because I'm actually going to keep that on the graphic. Because again, instead of the arrows, we're going to be looking at this because the slots almost work as sort of like groupings that have arrows in themselves. So we'll talk about it for a sec. So first slot, we have the ices and the waters. So as many Silph metas are, we see a lot of ice water types here. So Walrein, Celio, Dugong, Lapras. But we've also got access to Mud Boys in here. So Swampert. We're losing a lot of the other sort of main big hitters that have the water or ice typing. So Frostlass because of Frostlass and Jellicent because they've got the ghost typing, and so they don't want you to use them in this slot. Also got bans on Kingdra being a dragon type, and then Poliwrath as the sort of fighting user. So they want you to use them in other slots, not this one. So it's mostly ice waters, which actually I'll go through what the groups are first, just so we can sort of talk about them in a little bit more detail. And the second slot, we have the fighting, ground, and rock. So we have a lot of fighters. We've got Machamp, Primeape, Glade is in here as well. We've got Poliwrath, and then we've got Amora here as a rock type representative. We don't have any ground here because I personally don't feel like it's a good use of your slot. I think that because fighting isn't allowed in most of the other slots, I mean, Poliwrath is specifically banned in the water ice slot, or it would be otherwise available. I think that it's really important for you to use this slot as a fighting slot, especially because the ice waters are sort of taking up a lot of that slot 1. Using this for fighting is pretty important, and so then you can do super effective damage from slot 2 to slot 1. So slot 2 is sort of a counter to slot 1. Slot 3 is then a little bit of a counter to slot 2. So we sort of, you can sort of see why I've broken down the graphic in this way a little bit maybe. We've got some ghost types here. So we've got Jellicent, Cofagrigus, Gorgeist, we've got Frostlass, and then we also have some poison types in Nidoqueen and Dragalge. The ghost type is definitely really powerful because it does really do a good job up against those fighters. And also things like Jellicent. I think Jellicent is the number one well, we don't have the official PvPoke rankings yet as I'm recording this, but on the sort of just custom PvPoke do-it-yourself thingamajiggy that I plugged in, Jellicent was number 1 on the PvPoke rankings because it does do a lot of, really good job at resisting most of the stuff in this meta. And so it does a pretty good job up against the ice waters. And or Mud Boy, if you want to go that way in the first slot. Again, I don't recommend it. But then also it does a good job up against the fighters as well. You do have to be careful because just like in the Ember Field, we have Primeape with access to Night Slash that can fight back up against that Jellicent and may actually, I think that Primeape is probably going to be the most picked fighter is my prediction, but because we have counter for the first group, we have Night Slash for slot 3, and then we also have Ice Punch, which is good up against the dragons and flies that are in slot 4, but I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Can you tell this is all over the place and not scripted? Because yeah, it's not, but hopefully some of the sort of information is getting through well enough. Let me know if I need to script stuff in the future, but we also have access to those poison types, poison resisting fighting damage. So you have Nidoqueen in here in one of the only slots that it is eligible. It's actually eligible in 4 of your 6 slots if you want to count that last 2 as 2. But Nidoqueen is definitely a pretty good Pokemon as well, but probably not worth using this slot for it because, as mentioned, it is eligible in that sort of double slot 5 and 6. Dragalge isn't though. Dragalge is only eligible in this slot and the Dragon Flying slot right next door. So you might sort of, that has more reason to use it. Plus a Dragon is really largely not resisted in this cup because fairy typing is banned, steel typing banned, so dragon is really powerful. So I think that Dragalge might very well be a bit of a popular pick, if not here then in the dragon slot. But I think to allow you to have double dragon, Dragalge is going to go here, and then in slot 4, which we'll now talk about, there are a lot more options for other dragons. So Dragonair, Goodra, Dragonite. We've also got the flyers here, so Noctowl, Zapdos, Swoobat. Really, again, giving you more coverage on the flying side to the fighters. But if you just want neutral coverage, then the dragons may be the way to go. But again, you have to be careful of that Ice Punch Primeape that will be running around quite a bit. And so that might lead a lot of people to sort of go towards the flyers a little bit more. So maybe Swoobat with access to Confusion. They can do a really good job up against the fighting types. But at the same time, again, Primeape has access to Night Slash. Primeape is just like the constant what about Primeape? What about Primeape? So I think that, yeah, that is really going to be a powerhouse in this cup. So you've got a little bit of slot 1 is really good against slot 4. Slot 2 is good against slot 1. Slot 3 is good against slot 2. And in some places against slot 1 as well. And slot 4 is good against slot 2. Really weak to slot 1 though. So there's a lot of stuff going on there, but hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. And then slots 5 and 6, this double slot with a whole swath of typings, is kind of fill the gaps of your team. So up the very top of these 2 rows, we've got 5 Pokemon that are eligible in the other slots, but all of the other Pokemon that I've put on the graphic as sort of the main heavy hitters are banned in this slot because of the bans on Ice, Ghost, Fighting, and Dragon. So if you want to use those other ones, you have to use those first 4 slots. If you want to use something like a Mudboy or Nidoqueen or one of those flyers, in fact, you want to save that slot 4 for dragons, you can do that by just moving the flying type into slot 5 or 6 instead, which is probably the thing that most people are going to do. It's my prediction for how things are going to go. But then you've also got a bunch of new things, new options that are sort of in this bucket of new Pokemon that are eligible mostly in the other slots, but I think that they're more likely to be used here rather than taking away from those really big heavy hitters. For example, Golbat is eligible in the Poison Ghost slot, but I think that you're going to prefer to use that slot to get something powerful like a Jellicent and use Golbat here instead. Golbat definitely a pretty powerful pick because it does have access to Poison Fang, which, as we know, is a really good defense debuffing move. Plus, you have access to Shadow Ball, so you can do super effective damage to the Ghosts, do really well up against the Fighters as well with your flying coverage. Again, Primeape, Wii, but also quite weak to the Ice Waters. I've also got other Mudboys like Whiscash, but I'm not sold on Mudboys in this meta, to be completely honest with you. It depends what people start bringing in this slots 5 and 6. For example, we have Regirock, Beedrill, Alolan Graveler that are all weak to that Mud Bomb spam. And if those Pokemon become really big meta picks, then Whiscash might have a little bit more play by giving up those Mud Bomb spams and then also having access to Blizzard for the flying types and the dragons as well. So that, you know, it depends how the meta sort of unfolds in that regard. Also got things like Tentacruel that resist fighting, just other options to sort of beat up those fighters and then also do a pretty good job up against most of the meta just in doing general damage without taking much in the way of super effective because I don't see ground being too big. But again, if Tentacruel becomes massive, then I think Whiscash is going to be a lot bigger than it was before as well. I've also got some picks that I don't think anyone's really going to use, but they are options in Victreebel or Shadow Victreebel because Shadows are eligible, and Tropius. You know, they've got some play up against the Mud Boys. They have some play up against the Ice types as well, but they're going to be taking super effective damage back. Tropius is going to be taking double super effective damage back, so I probably wouldn't recommend it. In fact, I would say don't use Tropius. Like, do not use Tropius. And then, you know, Wailmer. I just put it on here because I like Wailmer. There is no good reason to use Wailmer in this cup. The fairies aren't here for you to use Heavy Slam on. Water Gun isn't doing super effective to pretty much anything. The fire types aren't around here. Rock is going to be a type that is not used very often in the slots that is eligible. So look, it's just there because I actually just had I had 8 Pokemon and there was a sort of gap for 3 rows of 3, and so I put Wailmer in there. So if you do use Wailmer though and win, like, you know, hit me up because I will absolutely do some commentary over that. But with that said, that is sort of all I want to say about the Vanguard Field. So all in all, these two are very different metas. So depending on how you like to approach your Silph metas, one of these might be a little bit more in your ballpark than the other, but we will just wait and see how it goes. But with that said, thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, especially that subscribe one. Don't forget to join the Discord. First link in the description down below. Yeah, thank you to my patrons and YouTube members as well. I was trying to move me. Whee! Do the old classic. I haven't put Debbie's. Also pretend that this says Debbie Pebble. Love you, Debbie Pebble. And I'll see you all in the next one, and some of you at the Brisbane Regional next weekend.